Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the fourth keynote of the inaugural Global STEMX Education Conference. Lots going on. A huge thanks to our conference sponsors. Really appreciate This is a chance for you to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map. You'll see some icons. The second one down is a star or a sunburst. Click on that and then click on the map. Ramsey will enjoy hearing where you're from, time, temperature. Look there, we have Australia. So we know we're an international session. So feel free to keep posting that in the chat as we move forward, but I want to give Ramsey as much time as he would like. So we're going to move forward now. Ramsey, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve and Lucy, for having me. It's an honor to talk to you all here today. Just a little bit about myself before I start. I am a high school chemistry teacher at Sacred Heart Cathedral in downtown San Francisco. I also am an adjunct professor of education at the University of San Francisco and Touro University here in the Bay Area. I've been teaching for 13 years. For the last 6 of those, I've also been the science chair, and in 2010, I got my doctorate in learning instruction with a focus on inquiry learning and multimedia learning at the University of San Francisco. So really what I would like to share with you guys today is my journey over the past, I would say, 6 years through the lens of 3 problems in instructional design. So I'm going to present that problem to you, kind of tell a little story about how I tried to negotiate that problem, and then talk about the results, hopefully leading you to a solid picture of how my perspective and frame of reference about using instructional video in the classroom specifically has changed. I'm looking at about a half an hour, 25 minutes, half an hour, and because I am a practitioner, I'm a full-time teacher, this presentation is going to conclude with some specifics about the technology, workflow technology, that I'm using in my classroom, and I foresee there being a lot of questions around that. I chose to use screenshots for this entire presentation rather than deal with the internet. So hopefully that'll increase some efficiency, but I posted in the chat and also on my profile page, if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see it, a bit.ly link to this entire presentation. So my blog is cyclesoflearning.com. On that blog, you can get all my information, direct links to my Google Drive, all my folders, all my media. Everything is there publicly for you, so I encourage you to go there. When you look at the slides, I uploaded the PDF of the slides, and then in the presenter notes, which I made visible, I put any URLs to videos. So, for example, there's a video I'm going to refer to by Professor Eric Mazur from Harvard, and it's called Confessions of a Converted Lecturer, and you'll see the URL right there. So don't worry, you'll have all those video links directly there for you, and this is what it would look like. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into my story. So the first problem I want to talk to you about is sort of the typical problem of an advanced placement teacher. I teach advanced placement chemistry. But I feel like all teachers can really relate with this. And it's the idea of how do I cover all of this required content while also using my class time for more cognitively rigorous tasks? Meaning, when I am present and all the students are present, how do I leverage our presence to really help students assimilate that information? And so that's really the first design challenge that I want to face. So if we look at it through a lens of Bloom's taxonomy, and if you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it's just the different facets for which we want students to be able to critically think and perform learning activities. So this is really what my classroom looked like the first half of my time teaching here at Sacred Heart. The class time is really devoted to lower Blooms. Mechanical content, algorithmic content, simpler tasks that worked really well in a transfer setting. So it was very easy for me to stand up in front of my students or have them stand up in front of the room and for us to show an equation, model some problem solving, etc. And then I would send the students home with various applications of that content. This typical homework, projects, videos, etc. that would usually be done at home. So that's what my classroom looked like. And then I stumbled across this amazing piece of technology around like 2006. Our school, in a stroke of genius, insert sarcasm there, decided to buy about 12 mobile smartboards, and one was delivered to my classroom. Being a very curious, tech-savvy person, at least I thought I was, I realized that there was a button on this smartboard where I could record my lectures. So what I started doing was I started by just simply recording my lectures live in class, and then I'd do that after school, show those to the students for homework, which would open up all the class time to do the things that I really wanted to do, those cognitively rigorous tasks we talked about in class. Around that time, I stumbled across this video by a man I really admire, Dr. Eric Mazur, is a physics professor out of Harvard. Does a lot of great research on how to maximize learning environments in higher ed, specifically lecture environments. And he was doing a model where he was having his students go home and do the reading first and watch videos first, and then came into class, and rather than lecture at them, he engaged in something which he called peer instruction, which is basically a glorified think, pair, share throughout the lecture. So I decided that this is what I wanted to do in my classroom, that this would address that instructional design problem. So he has a great quote in this video, Confessions of a Converted Lecturer. It says, education is one part transfer and one part assimilation. As teachers in the 21st century, we must focus on that assimilation piece. That must be how we spend our time. So I decided this is what I was going to do. The transfer was going to take place in the video using my smartboard, and later on I was using graphics tablets and Camtasia and other screencasting software. And I was going to use Classroom for assimilation. So essentially what I was doing was sort of reversing or flipping around, if you want to use the buzzword, Bloom's taxonomy, where what was happening now at home was these lower end tasks. It was just happening in the form of a video. And what we do in class were these peer instruction, if you will. So negotiating higher order problems, labs, projects, etc. And this was great. It was the solution that I was really, really looking for. So the results, anecdotally and based on student surveys, after a couple years, really wasn't that good. And in general, I think it can be summarized this way. The students just seemed burnt out. And it really felt to me like I had all this time, but my class really became more of a study hall, is what it felt like. I think the students could do all the problems, and I saw them do a lot more problems, but I didn't really see an increase in their conceptual understanding of those problems. And I think that is a shame when the subject they're studying is exactly what they're made out of. It seems so counterintuitive to me that they shouldn't have a conceptual understanding of chemistry when it's exactly what the chair is made out of that they're sitting in, the entire world that we're interacting with. So something was wrong, and I really struggled with this. I didn't understand why. I felt I had solved that initial problem. So that brings me to problem number 2 that I started really thinking about towards the end of my time in graduate school when I was writing my dissertation. And this problem was really, okay, now that I have this time, now that we flipped the situation around and students are using class time for assimilation and getting that lower end content at home, how do I cultivate their curiosity in and improve their conceptual understanding of the phenomena at hand? And it kind of hit me, just because they're getting the lecture at home doesn't mean they want the lecture. Just because it's happening in a different place doesn't make it a paradigm shift or a good thing. And I really started to sit on that and have some realizations around that. And this was a really, really exciting time for me when I was trying to negotiate this problem. So what we were doing before is we were doing a lot of labs in class. And I didn't understand why they didn't have a conceptual understanding of the phenomena when we'd spend 60 minutes sometimes doing labs. Some very simple labs like this, for example, giving students a bunch of candles, having them put different size cups on top of the candle. I think everybody listening right now, if I were to ask you what happens if you put the cup on the candle, I think most people would say the cup goes out. And if I gave you some time to think about it right now, I bet you would think because it runs out of oxygen. And that's what I thought too. And I would teach it that way. I would give them detailed instructions, and I would tell them directly to put different size jars on top of their candles and ask them what they thought would happen. And it was kind of a no-brainer. They would say they'd all go out, and the one with the smaller jar on it would go out first because it's got less oxygen. And then I would say, yay, I'm very proud of you. And that would lead into a great discussion around combustion reactions and water vapor and all kinds of stuff. And I just blindly accepted this misconception because they weren't really doing a lab. They were just doing a verification of what I told them to do directly. And it didn't hit me until one kid stood up, literally, and this was one of the scariest days of my career. He just stood up and looked me in the eyes in front of everybody and said, I don't believe you. He goes, I do not believe that it's because the oxygen goes out. And I'm standing there, 31 years old, about to get a doctorate degree in education, teaching AP chemistry, and in the back of my head, I sort of know that he's right. Like, I am just assuming that it's because the oxygen goes out. So at this time, this was a really tipping point moment for me. The students looked at him, they looked back at me, they looked at him, and I started to go over in my head these ideas about how I would respond. Normally something like, well, it's fairly complicated, yada, 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 insert more words to sound smart, or the typical, let's just chat after class so we can delve deeper into it. But I said two words in response, which now looking back on it, I think were the best two words of my career. And I don't know where they came from, but I looked at him and I just said, prove it. I need you to prove it. And suddenly, when I said that to him, the entire mood of the class changed. No longer was he this intimidating, cynical, Holden Caulfield-esque, hormonal student who just wanted to challenge me, but everybody looked at him, and we all gathered around his table, and it turned into this amazing learning environment when I asked him to prove it. It was just, I can't even tell you, I get the chills right now talking about how amazing that moment was. And what he said to me was fascinating. He said, all right, here's why I think it. My group over there, what we did is we put one of the candles on top of a rubber stopper, and this is an exact picture from that day. And the top candle went out first. And he goes, I don't think that the top candle ran out because of a lack of oxygen, because why would the bottom one still be burning? And everybody was just scratching their head, including me, and we all started giggling. And I just looked at him again and I said, all right, everybody, go figure out why the top one goes out first. And everybody ran to their desk. And then within 10 minutes, he yelled, like, I think I figured it out. And we ran back to his table. And he said, check it out. If I trap all the carbon dioxide inside my cup and I drop it on top of both, they go out at the same time. So I think it's the carbon dioxide. And everybody started jumping up and down. And this led to a great day where we as a class realized, just to nerd out for a sec, what's really going on is that the hot carbon dioxide is rising, hitting the top, cooling down, and landing on top of the candle. There's plenty of oxygen in there, but it's the carbon dioxide that's putting it out. Something that for 10 years I had been doing that I thought was as simple as it's running out of oxygen really was a demonstration about, the kinetic molecular theory of gases and how they move through contained environments as the temperature changes, which was this crazy misconception. None of us knew that. And the only reason we discovered that is because I just let go and let go of the reins and gave it over to the student. And that was a huge, huge shift for me, or a moment as an educator. So those two words, prove it, really are still ring in my head today. That was we talk about something called the critical moment in educational research. What is that critical moment when the class went from good to bad? And it was, I think, in my career, the critical moment so far has just been that moment when I said, prove it to that boy. So, I started really, really thinking about this. And a couple summers ago, I found myself on a porch in Portland with Jay Silver. Some of you guys might know who Jay Silver is. He worked under Mitch Resnick at MIT, and he developed a program called Makey Makey, which is very big in the maker movement. Jay is actually the first cousin of one of my friends, and I was amazed that I was sitting there talking to Jay, and we were talking about this exact issue. How complicated it is to teach people things and how complicated it is to address their misconceptions in class. And that it's not as simple as just giving them a video to watch at home. And we had this amazing conversation. And Jay said a couple things that really, really rang true with me. And the first quote that he said it was so profound. He said, transferring knowledge to people would be great if it worked. And that really just blew me away. It was so simple. And he went on to say, something really profound. He said it's natural for people who have already learned something to want to share what they have learned with other people, to want to show people. I spent 6 years in college learning about chemistry and biology, and I was really proud of that. And I wanted to share it with my students. And I think a lot of teachers do that. It's sort of the definition of teaching. And it's so counterintuitive to think of the idea of being less helpful as a way to produce a window into being more helpful. And that's kind of counterintuitive when you already know a lot about the content. So this is really profound when Jay said that to me. And really, what we started talking about was this idea of information assimilation that Eric Mazur talked about. I said, well, Jay, I had 60 minutes in my class for assimilation of content, which refers to the adding of new information to your schema. Like Eric Mazur said, transfer at home, assimilation in class. So that's what I was doing. But I didn't see learning go up. The AP scores actually went down. Students seemed less motivated. And we talked about the subtle difference between assimilation of content and accommodation of content. And he really encouraged me to think about the accommodation piece. And he said that's what was missing. Accommodation is that idea. It's the adaptive process where we change the existing schema in our minds to adjust for the way the world actually works. And that's what I was missing. I had all this class time to do things, but I was assuming that all of the kids were blank slates, that they all brought to the table the same prior knowledge just because they went to the same middle school or something like that. But it's much more complicated than that. And he really encouraged me to think about giving the students time to accommodate, to build this cognitive dissonance between the way they think the world works and the way the world actually works. And if you do that, then you have amazing, amazing windows into information transfer. And this really got me thinking a lot. So I revisited Bloom's taxonomy because for me as a teacher, it provides this nice framework that helps me lesson plan. And I think everybody has their little tricks. I like to always have Bloom's taxonomy in front of me. But what I started doing is instead of thinking about it as a 1-2 punch where the transfer happened in the video and the assimilation happened in class, I apologize that this image is overlapped on top of that. I decided to start off with kind of higher blooms to allow the students to have a chance to accommodate. So rather than take them from the bottom and bring them to the top, I decided to sort of start at the top and then bring them back up, sort of a walk around Bloom's taxonomy, with the goal of building interest, facilitating accommodation, and then surfacing their misconceptions, so that those misconceptions could be windows into instruction rather than assuming they want the content. And it was such a nice switch, thinking about it as a walk around Bloom's, where I'm starting up here and then I'm going down here and then coming back up there. It really fit nicely with some of the things that I really wanted to do in terms of critical thinking. So this is the way that I like to look at this model now, and you can find this model on my website, Cycles of Learning. I like to think about it as an explore, flip, apply, where in the explore piece, what we're trying to do is we're trying to spark curiosity, spark questions, and then challenge students to answer those questions. And sometimes they are actually able to answer those questions on their own. And that's why the arrow goes from explore right down to apply. And sometimes they're not able to answer those questions on their own. And if they can't do that, then we go over here to the flip piece. And what I mean by that is that would be a time when I would give them a video. But instead of assuming that I know what they want by having preloaded videos from the year before, or a con video, or something else, in this case, what I'm trying to do is make these in response to their misconceptions, and I'll show you some of that earlier. That I don't know if they need that until they've had a chance to negotiate that perplexity. So this is the model that I'm really struggling with right now and really having a fun time exploring. It's really exciting. So when I look now at the current AP Chemistry curriculum, if there's any people out there that are familiar with it, it just went through a big overhaul where all the standards were changed. And I got to be honest with you, when I look at some of the things in there, one of those being something called photoelectron spectroscopy, I get a little nervous because, to be honest with you, I don't really have a clue what photoelectron spectroscopy really is. I mean, I've heard of it. I know it's a way to figure out the electronic structure of an atom, but I've never read one of these things. I've never done it before. And in the past, I think what I would have done is bought like AP Chemistry for Dummies and read this cover to cover and made some sort of really fancy video to make it seem like I knew what I was talking about. Now, I kind of feel like maybe it's a good thing that I don't know anything about it. Maybe that's going to allow me to more readily hand that over to the students, and they're going to be able to help me assimilate that content and accommodate that content. And I'm really excited for that shift, that cultural shift in the classroom that's going to happen as this curriculum sort of progresses through the year. So as a result in this, and this is anecdotal from just various forms of action research, the students seem to be more motivated to learn, and the immense diversity of student prior knowledge and content misconceptions began to surface. You would be shocked. 100% of the students thought the candles went out because there wasn't enough oxygen in there. That's a really easy thing to think about. We all are afraid of being trapped in an environment where we can't breathe, and we all know that candles need oxygen. We all know that we need oxygen. So we come to the table with this schema that says, candle goes out, there is no oxygen. And that's a really, really hard schema to break unless we put the students in charge of breaking it. And it's just been really exciting to make instructional video that's tailored rather than assuming I know what students need. So that really brings me to what I consider the third problem in the instructional design, and this is the technology problem. And the one thing I really want to emphasize is the technology really it did not come first. This is last. And negotiating that pedagogical issue, that issue in meaningful learning, before really trying to develop a fluid technology workflow has really made all the difference in my practice. You know, Rustin Hurley has a great quote where he says, you know, technology won't turn a good teacher into a bad one, but a good teacher using technology well can do great things. And I think what I was 4 years ago when I was trying to negotiate that first problem is I was a bad teacher trying to use technology, and I was using it poorly. And that's why I wasn't able to increase student motivation, increase student interest. So that's something that really, really, really speaks to me. So that's the problem is, how do I create a structured, accountable system that identifies misconceptions, tailors learning based on student prior knowledge? So basically, how do I workflow this stuff? How do I get that information? How do I give students feedback? How do I make it easy for me? How do I make it accountable for them? So I want to share that with you guys. We're going to conclude after that. I'll probably take around 10 minutes, and then I'm going to open it up for any questions. So my class website is shcapchem.com. And that's also linked in the PDF that I shared with you guys earlier. I encourage you, I'm going to be showing you screenshots from this, but I encourage you while you're listening to me talk to just get on that website and click around. Click on that blue periodic table that you see right away, and that's going to take you to our lesson planning documents. You can even see exactly what we did, 3 hours ago in class today. So what I'm going to talk about is really that workflow around identifying our misconceptions first in class, and then using those misconceptions to create a video, and then how do I gather information from them after they've watched it to tailor instruction. So I'm gonna share with you some little hacks that I use around there, and I apologize if this is stuff you're already familiar with. So the first thing I like to do is I like to think of my website as my lesson planning database. So this is a screenshot directly from my website. Rather than have it as a place for resources, I like to think of it as a place where students are working from. So we are a one-to-one bring-your-own-device school, so my students either have cell phones or iPads or Chromebooks or whatever. So the first thing is they'll walk in, and if we're on cycle 1, if you notice, there are 4 parts to cycle 1. There's 3 learning objectives. This was how we started off the year. And those 4 parts are Part A, which is the lab. Part B is the continuation of that lab. Part C is the practice, and Part D is a quiz. So you can think of Part A and B as explore. What happens between B and C is flip, and that would be via this video that I don't make active until we finish Part B. And Part C is that apply piece. I like to call it words they already know. I really don't believe in using educational jargon with the students. So in my mind, when I go to workshops and I'm talking with you all, I'm saying explore, flip, apply, because I think I'm speaking to a crowd that understands that. But with my students, I just say, we're starting off with the labs, guys. That's how science works. We want to discover things. We want to construct meaning from our environment, rather than assume that I'm going to construct that for you. And then we're going to do some practice there. Notice that nowhere there does it say lecture. That's happening in the video. So the first thing is I have to create a website, and each one of those links to a Google document that the students are working from. And I really like that workflow. I make it view only, and I love that workflow because I don't have to make any PowerPoints or keynotes. I can just directly link everything there for the students, and they always have access to it, and I'm really creating a book, if you will, of my curriculum as we go through the year. So in this cycle 1, we started off with a lab where I challenged the students to do a process of electrolysis. Basically, they separated water into hydrogen and oxygen. And I asked them to gather those hydrogen and oxygen bubbles, and they had to make a hypothesis as to what they thought that substance was. So I didn't tell them it was water. And they end up getting about a 2-to-1 ratio of the bubbles, and they all extrapolate that it's water. They think it's water. And we talk about different groups had differing amounts of water. So we talk about if the amount of water you have affects the ratios of hydrogen and oxygen. The next day, I then gave them a solution of salt water, and they separated that out. And we collected the mass of salt and the mass of water. In both of these situations, I never gave them a procedure. I simply said to them, when you heat this stuff, the water goes away. You need to figure out the percentages. And it's really fun to watch them sink their teeth in. Even the kids that really, really struggle in science are more invested because it's a challenge. And then from there, there's a link to a Google form in their document for the day where I have all my students submit their data from that. And I really believe in gathering class data, that we are only as good as the sum of our parts. So we never, ever do a lab and think of our data as an island. We always share it out. So that's the last thing they do. They do that, and I make that data public to them. So here's a screenshot of the data. If you notice, there's the percentages of salt, percentages of water. I tricked them all by giving them different molarities of solutions. So they all came up with different percentages. And this was hammering the point that mixtures do not have to have a different composition, but they can still be a mixture. And we compared and contrast that to the previous lab. So this is really great. So the students at the end of these 2 days had an idea of the difference between a mixture and a pure substance. I had never told them, though. They've collected data and they've compared that data. At this point, I want to give them some lower balloons content. I want to give them algorithms, equations, if there are some, and definitions. But I did not want to give that to them until they had a chance to construct that on their own. So this is where they would go home that night and they'd click that little button and they'd watch a video that I made that afternoon. And the first thing I do in the video, this is an embedded video from Vimeo. I use Vimeo because I really like their customized embed features. If you notice, I start off the video with a review of the lab they did in class. And the point of this is to prove to the students psychologically that I am actually making these things on the fly, that I am not using stuff from last year. I want them to believe that I am tailoring it for them. And it's actually much easier to do this because it's a much more authentic video. So they go through that process, they watch the video. It's usually about 3 to 4 minutes long. When the video is done, they click this button, and I have them fill out a reflection of the video. Actually, what they do first is they answer a multiple choice and free response question that are in the video. So if you notice here, this is the end of the video at about 10 minutes. This is a longer one. And this multiple choice question pops up. And I ask them to press pause, and I ask them to solve it. And then there's a free response question, and I ask them to press pause, and I ask them to solve it. And then when they go to the form, this is what they fill out after they're done watching it. So they give me a summary of the video. So they say, this video is about, specifically, I really understood, and I struggled to understand. What I don't tell them is I'm only reading the 4th sentence. I read that 4th sentence to understand what they struggle with in the video. Then there's a place for them to put in their answer to the free response question, and there's a place for them to put in their answer to the multiple choice question. The reason I put the question in the video and not the form is twofold. One, most important pedagogically, is that it forces the students to push their way through the video without me having to instill any rules. It naturally builds in a system where they know that they have to get through that in order to get to the video. From a workflow perspective, I use only one form for all the videos because if you notice, this is just a template. So that really, really helps me keep track of their work. The next thing I ask them is to explain how they solve the multiple choice question. This is sort of the metacognition question. And all of this is pass, no pass. They just have to give it a try. and I really like that. So if I were to ask everybody watching right now, what do you think the students want to know right away after they answer these questions, I'm sure a lot of you would say, I want to know if I got the question right. And I struggled with that a lot. You know, what I used to do is I would send an email out to the whole class, or I'd post the answers on Edmodo, or I'd send out a Google Doc, or I'd put it on our website. And I really struggled with that because I wanted the students to do these videos anytime they wanted to between the explore and the apply phase. So I never really knew when to post the answers. And then it finally hit me. When they hit submit in the form, they get an edit confirmation. And they're not going to get that edit confirmation until they, as an individual, hit submit. But I realized that if you put things like a link in that edit confirmation, they are live, active links. So what I do now is I put the solutions to the questions in the edit confirmation. The students are really, really liking this because they don't know if they're going to get it right until they go hit submit. I tell them I only want one submission in the spreadsheet, so they can't really hack up the system. And what I've been doing is something fun where I actually make another video of the solutions. So it's sort of a meta video. And I'm using some iPad apps to do that. It's really nothing fancy. But this really, really solved a huge problem for me. I wanted them to get immediate feedback. This little system also can take a 5-minute video and it can turn it into 20 minutes of meaningful outside of class time. You know, I am not a fan of homework. However, when I'm in this explore, flip, apply approach, they're really getting only one video a week usually because we're a block schedule. And it's really 20 meaningful minutes where they're digging into things and critically thinking. And I really feel like it's a positive way for them to spend their outside of class time. So all of that information goes into a spreadsheet. Here's an exact image of it. You can see there's the multiple choice question. I'm going to quickly skim that to see if they got the right question. In this case, C is the right answer. And I'm going to read their free response answers just to see if they have any huge misconceptions that I need to address in class the next day. But something that is kind of advanced that I've really had a fun time doing is I've really gotten excited about using scripts in the form. Specifically, I use a script called Form Emailer. And what Form Emailer allows me to do is it allows me to email the students directly from the spreadsheet. So if you notice this person's summary, she said, this video is about the differences between mixtures and pure substances. You know, blah, 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 blah. Then she says at the end, I struggled to understand the multiple choice question. I visually tried to get an answer, but I honestly forgot how to set up the reaction. So I email her back in the column right next to it, and I say, you know, or I emailed him, I said, Jerry, you know, here's the deal. H2 plus O2 goes to H2O. Just, you know, balance the hydrogens first and the oxygen. Come see me in class if you need any extra help. And then I can go immediately to the next student. And the cool thing about this is it allows me to email 30 kids in like 10 minutes. And they can get honest feedback directly from me from the spreadsheet. And I do this in the morning as they're walking into class. And I only email the kids who really have significant questions. This is what an email would look like. You set up a little template. So the way I have it is I say hi, and then it mail merges from the spreadsheet, the student's name. So hi, Cassie. Below is your summary. And then I have it pull out of the spreadsheet her summary and put it right back in. That allows her to have a reference so she remembers what she struggled with. And then I say below is my feedback. And I give her some feedback. You know, this one's kind of ridiculous. Think about it like people in a room. One person has a 2-to-1 proportion of arms and heads. I don't even forget what I'm talking about there. But this is my workflow that takes me from the lab into the video and then back into class. And really, it's very self-contained in one Google spreadsheet. I really enjoy it. The next class would be applications of problems, practice problems, and hopefully taking us back up to the top of Bloom's taxonomy where they're going to do some creating on their own. And this has been a really fun way to lesson plan because I can lesson plan in chunks, in cycles, rather than it being, what am I going to do the next day? What am I going to do the next day? And the students really have enjoyed thinking about things in terms of cycles. So that concludes my presentation. That was about 40 minutes. And I apologize, I talked kind of fast. That was a jam through everything there. But I would love to answer any questions that people have at this point. So I'm not sure, Steve, how this works, but I'm here. Thank you guys very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy, and Steve is stepping away for a minute, so I'm taking over for him. If you have any questions for Ramsey, you can type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and I'll give you mic privileges, and you can ask it if you want to. But I think this is a fabulous session, Ramsey, and we just want to thank you for giving us your time and sharing your mindset with us. I think that's the most important thing here, is seeing how you think is going to really inspire teachers. So it looks like somebody raised their hand. Who's the lucky person? I don't see who it is. Oh, Jim. What do you know? Let me give you the mic, Jim.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ramsey, this is just, I'm just dancing here listening to you talk and to encounter an honest-to-goodness constructivist at work and explaining the innards of how your class works. It's just thrilling. But so drilling down just a little bit deeper on the I love the idea of creating videos that are actually, you know, part of the conversation you're having live in a class instead of being like pre-recorded things from 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more how you create these in real time so they are fresh and relevant? You said, okay. Oh, I have this app and it's just, you know, tell us more.
Yeah. So I think like anything, it's not as hard as you think it is. So the first thing is when I started thinking about things through a lens of constructivism, I started getting really excited about the pedagogy and not caring at all about the technology. And that was the first hurdle for me. I was the first guy to be given workshops at Q and ISTE on how to screencast. And when I finally started doing it this way, I realized I didn't care. I just wanted to get the lower blooms into video form so I could get it to them. So honestly, what I do right now is while they're working in the lab, I'm simply just walking around the class, you know, probing them, picking at them, being really, you know, less helpful in a better way. And I'm taking pictures of them too. So I'm taking pictures of what they're doing. My students are also doing their lab reports via blogs. So I have their blogs as artifacts. So what I do is I try and gather a couple pictures from the lab. Once they leave, I ask myself on their own, when I read their blogs, I say, were they able to construct the knowledge on their own? If they were able to construct the knowledge, when they see their homework posted, it will say, no homework, you figured it out on your own. Or it'll say, watch this video. And what I've been doing, honestly, and I'm actually going to get it so I can show you guys right now. It's right next to me. Hold on. I have this chemistry ring stand right here, and this is super budge. But I have a chemistry ring stand, and I put a little piece of duct tape at the top, and I can slip my camera right in there. And what I do is I just put a piece of paper below me, and I just hit record, and I make the video on the piece of paper. And then from there, I can just in the Google Drive app, I can simply just add the video right to my Google Drive and then immediately share it with my students. And that's how I've been getting the videos to them. I don't go to YouTube or anything. I mentioned Vimeo in there, and that was a specific video that I did because there were some things that I couldn't do. But most of the time, I'm simply like writing with my phone over a piece of paper. Which is so fun because I don't know if people know this, but in the Google Drive app, if you hit the plus button, you can upload video directly to your account, which can be embedded. So you're totally skipping YouTube or anything like that. So that's honestly what I'm doing, and it takes me about 5 to 10 minutes. And the students really love it. They think it works better than anything else because it's more authentic. So.
There's one question from Brett Criswell. He says, Ramsey, do you see a need to differentiate the structure for students in different course levels? And I may have missed whether you responded to that or not because my connection was dropped.
Lucy, can you read the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Do you see a need to differentiate the structure for students in different course levels?
Okay, great. Excellent question. So the way that I like to think about this structure is this is an overly structured way of looking at constructivism because I am sort of a OCD control freak when it comes to like planning in the classroom. But really what I think people should take from this is that the direct instruction doesn't happen first. So no matter what classroom I'd walk into, you know, whether it was a first grade classroom or a 8th grade classroom, I would just look at my students' levels and I would figure out a way to build interest before I delivered lecture. I mean, you know, that could be 10 minutes of questions before you do a lecture, as long as it's not the first thing they experience. So yeah, I think that there's, you know, I have a freshman physics course, and with those kiddos, I'm not even doing the video as homework. I'm doing the actual lecture in class, but I'm doing it the next day. So I call that explore, explain, apply instead of explore, flip, apply. Because those kids, some of them don't have access, and they're just younger, and I just want to be looking at them, and I don't know. It's a little more traditional. But with my AP kids, I need that extra day for the curriculum, so I flip it because of that. But the idea of delayed instruction is the key thing. And there's a lot of research. There's a big study that just came out of Stanford a month ago on, they call it the flipped flip, where they're flipping Bloom's taxonomy, like starting with creation activities and going towards transfer. And that showed huge statistical significance. And then a whole study on delayed instruction in mathematics came out last year as well. Just this whole idea that being less helpful before you're helpful is actually more helpful. So hopefully that answers the question, sort of, kind of a cop-out answer. But
hey, I have a question for you, Ramsey. I've been working with a lot of high school classrooms lately, and it seems like teachers are still, they'd love to teach this way and to be more constructivist in the way that they approach things, but they're so worried about covering the content and spending enough time with the text. Mm-hmm. And I think it comes from, you know, pressures above. How do you, I mean, are you, with your older physics students, are you trying to prepare them for AP? Do you feel overly pressured to try and get them ready for that, or does this naturally enhance the process for you?
I totally hear what you're saying. Okay, so first off, I will say that I actually go faster this way because more meaningful learning is happening, and the students are more motivated, so they're more driven. But I will say, okay, when you think about constructivism is a theory. It's not a learning pedagogy. So the theory of constructivism, the idea that our prior knowledge is the backbone of our future knowledge, that idea can be harnessed in many different ways. So in one way, you could look at like modeling instruction in physics coming out of Arizona State University. So that's as raw as constructivism gets. And that is the students are gonna work through activities until they get to the point where they can deploy the content to each other, and they are gonna build all those models on their own. And that can really take a long time. And if you look at the modeling curriculum, it doesn't necessarily cover a lot of physics content, but it's covering the essentials in an incredibly powerful way. So that's one way. The other way is guided inquiry instruction, which is what I'm doing. And my idea with that is I don't care if they're able to form the models on their own. I just want to give them a chance to try to, and then when the class is over, we're going into transfer. And because of that, it's the exact same amount of days, just in the opposite order. Instead of lab, practice, instead of like lecture, practice, lab, it's lab, lecture at home, practice. So I'm actually saving a day. So I think that constructivism can be often seen as waiting for all the kids to construct meaning. But in some ways, it's giving them an opportunity to accommodate. And you don't always have to wait for the whole process to happen. So.
Okay, a couple more questions. Jim and I posted a link to a Stanford news item, and Steve also posted something. I'm assuming those are the references that the site that you're referencing. So just.
Yeah, they're on my website. Paulo Blickstein is the author of the Stanford.
Okay, I know who he is. Okay, great. We actually tried to get him to keynote the conference too. So, but he was going to be out of the country, I believe. The next question is, if I can find where I was, Michael asked, did you find that there was an initial frustration threshold to overcome before students adjusted to this model?
Oh, absolutely not. So this is the counterintuitive thing with this is something that I'm very opinionated about, so I apologize ahead of time. But when Jay and I were on that porch that day talking about this, and if you go on my blog, I have my whole talk with Jay videotaped. And just go to cycleslearning.com and type in Jay Silver in the search box, and you'll be able to watch that whole interview. But we were talking about this idea that where we should start in teaching is where the brain starts. Like, that's the only place you start. You don't start anywhere else. And the brain starts with accommodation. This idea that when I go up to something in the world, I don't walk up to it and it doesn't tell me everything about itself. I have to poke at it, I have to touch it, I have to feel it, I have to do research on it. When I walk up to people, it's the same way. I have to get to know them. I may or may not hit it off with them. I don't walk up to somebody and they don't tell me their social security number and where they were born and the year of their birth and everything immediately. But oftentimes with students, that's what we do with content. We don't give them time to struggle with it and think about it and deal with it and live in it before we give them a chance to understand the intricacies of it. So what I've found personally is that all that's happening is the students are just interacting with school the way that they interact with the world all the time. Every single great movie doesn't start with the teacher. Mr. Miyagi shows up in the middle after Daniel's son gets his butt kicked, Yoda shows up in the middle of Star Wars. Like, there's never a teacher, this wise sage at the very beginning of the movie. There's always a journey to a mentor. And I think that when students kind of see that you are a mentor and they're going to journey towards you, but you're going to hold them up and you're going to help them, I don't see any other way of teaching, personally. I don't think there would be any other option with students. So that's my opinion on that.
This is just great, Ramsey. I can't wait to show this to people as hopefully I'll show it to them in the middle of instruction as an example of what they can do. Any other questions for Ramsey before we wrap up tonight, everybody? Or it may not be tonight for you, but it is for me. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What's interesting about the Miyagi thing, if you watch the movie, he jumps over that little fence to help Daniel's son after he already gets kicked in the face about 3 times. So if Ralph Macchio was able to win that fight, he would have crawled right back to his little shop and not even helped them out. So, sometimes we need to let our kids struggle before we know how to help them.
Excellent point. I agree. Great way to end. If you didn't catch it earlier, I believe this is the link to Ramsey's slides. And you can catch him in lots of different places. If you haven't seen his TED presentation, he was actually part of a group of educators that appeared on public TV in the U.S. Last spring?
Yeah, last spring.
Okay, pretty phenomenal. And he's also on the Infinite Thinking Machine, which is a weekly video show highlighting all different kinds of cool things. So make sure that you check out his blog and those 2 other resources as well. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact him too. He's also a member of our STEMX community, and you can leave a message for him on his profile as well. Thanks, Ramsey. We really appreciate it, and good luck with your TEDx tomorrow.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.